Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're discussing one of the most significant antitrust enforcement actions in the past years. And the Justice Department returned a superseding indictment of 4 Chinese shipping container manufacturers and 7 of their senior executives for a multi-year conspiracy to fix prices, restrict output, basically affecting 35 billion in global commerce. Now, this case is kind of a return to the large conspiracy, international conspiracy enforcement that the department used to do years ago. It's been years that since probably the auto supplier conspiracy that was prosecuted for years. But this involves an international cartel and COVID-era profiteering at the direct expense of American consumers. A dramatic arrest at Charles de Gaulle Airport, and it raises critical questions about antitrust compliance obligations for companies operating in concentrated, high-risk industries globally. So let's talk about the facts, then we're going to dig into the compliance lessons. 4 corporate defendants: CIMC, Singamas Container Holdings, Fang International Containers, and CXIC Group. Together with 2 unnamed co-conspirators, these 6 companies controlled approximately 95% of global production of standard dry shipping containers, the steel intermodal boxes that carry essentially everything we buy across the oceans. And before the charged conspiracy, they competed. That competition kept prices low and supply plentiful. Notice you have 2 unindicted or unnamed co-conspirators. They're probably companies that cooperated under the Leniency program. According to the superseding indictment, starting in November 2019, senior executives from the 4 companies and an unnamed co-conspirator met at CIMC's headquarters in Shenzhen and agreed to restrict production. They limited production line shifts. They installed 87 surveillance cameras across 49 dry container production lines to make sure nobody cheated. They agreed not to build new factories, and they created a penalty fund. If any company exceeded its agreed quota, it paid the others. Singamas actually joined in March of 2020 when the cartel was actually already existing. And then COVID hit, and Americans stopped spending on travel and restaurants. They hunkered down and bought goods, medical supplies, home office equipment, household staples. Demand for shipping containers surged. Supply had been deliberately choked, and the results were predictable and devastating. Container prices more than doubled. CIMC's container manufacturing profits went from roughly $20 million in 2019 to $1.75 billion in 2021, nearly a 100-fold increase in 2 years. Singamas swung from a $110 million loss to nearly $187 million in profit over the same period. And American consumers obviously paid the price. Empty store shelves, months-long back orders, surging prices on essentials we all needed, and the defendants knew they were breaking the law. Their own emails show executives warning each other to delete message threads and flagging the risk of violating monopoly laws. They knew, but they proceeded anyway. One executive has been arrested so far, and that's going to be really the challenge here, is to arrest the executives. On April 14th, Vick Ma, a marketing director at Singamas, attempted to board a flight from Charles de Gaulle Airport to Hong Kong when French law enforcement, working with the FBI, GSA's OIG, Postal Service OIG, and Homeland Security investigations, intercepted him. DOJ called it Operation Midnight in Paris. The other 6 individual defendants remain at large. Now, let's step back and talk about what this case means for all of us as compliance professionals. There's an critically important lesson buried in the facts of this indictment that does not get enough attention. This was not a rogue employee scheme. This was not a low-level conspiracy concealed from management. The architects of this cartel were the CEOs, chairmen, and vice presidents of the world's largest container companies. And think about what that tells us. No compliance program below the executive level can prevent cartel conduct when the people at the top of the organization are the ones driving it. C-suite misconduct has devastating impact if unchecked. And that's the governance failure at the heart of this case. And it brings up directly the single most important element of any compliance program, be it antitrust, be it anti-corruption, be it trade sanctions, tone at the top. Boards of directors and senior leadership must treat antitrust compliance as an absolute non-negotiable obligation, not a legal technicality, not a box to check, a genuine business and ethical commitment. That means boards need to ask hard, specific questions about how their companies interact with competitors, in trade associations, at industry conferences, in informal communications, in pricing discussions. And they need to make clear repeatedly and unambiguously that cartel conduct is a line that cannot be crossed. Now, beyond governance, there's several other elements that an effective antitrust cartel compliance program must include. Training is the foundation. Employees in sales, pricing, operations, procurement, and business development need to understand exactly what conduct crosses the criminal line. Price fixing, output restriction, market allocation, bid rigging. The training must be specific, scenario-based, and tailored to your real business risks. Abstract legal lectures about antitrust laws do not work. Concrete examples do. Next, competitor interaction policies. The container cartel operated through in-person executive meetings, messaging platforms, and email threads. A strong compliance program must set explicit, written rules governing what can and cannot be discussed whenever competitors are in the room, including at trade association events and industry conferences, which are historically some of the most common venues for cartel activity. Then there is internal reporting and escalation. If an employee receives an approach from a competitor that feels wrong or observes suspicious conduct at an industry meeting, they must know exactly where to report. And they must trust that reporting will be taken seriously and will not damage their career. Anonymous reporting mechanisms are not just a good practice here, they are essential. Document and communication hygiene also matters enormously. One of the most striking elements of this case is that executives discussed deleting incriminating emails and likely did not delete all of them. Those communications are now central to the prosecution. Employees at every level need to understand that cartel discussions, however casual or indirect, must never occur, and that any suspicious communications from competitors should be immediately escalated to legal counsel. Now, let me also say something about industry risk assessment. Not every company faces the same antitrust cartel risk, but companies operating in industries with concentrated market structures, commodity pricing, significant trade association activity, and cross-border competitor relationships are in an elevated risk territory. Container manufacturing is the textbook example, but the same risk profile appears in chemicals, transportation, construction, financial services, and many other sectors. Companies in those industries need to conduct specific, honest antitrust risk assessments and calibrate their compliance programs accordingly. And finally, let's talk about what a strong compliance program can do when problems arise. The Antitrust Division, as you know, has a well-established corporate leniency program. The first company to self-report cartel conduct and cooperate fully can receive complete immunity from criminal prosecution. This is an extraordinary incentive, but it is only available to the company that moves first. A compliance program that identifies cartel activity early through training, reporting, internal audits, and escalation procedures can position a company to take advantage of that opportunity. One that lacks those tools may not discover the problem until law enforcement is already in the door. The container cartel case is ultimately a story about what happens when antitrust compliance is jettisoned, treated as someone's problem, ignored. 6 of the 7 defendants, individuals, remain at large. Their companies, however, face potential fines that could dwarf the $100 million statutory maximum, given the profit figures alleged. And the reputational damage to these companies that controlled 95% of a globally critical commodity is immeasurable. The antitrust division's message is direct: fix prices, rig bids, or restrict output, and DOJ will pursue you anywhere in the world. And the compliance community's answer must be equally direct: build the programs, train the people, and set the tone at the very top before enforcement comes knocking. Thanks again for joining me today, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon for another episode of Corruption, Crime, and Compliance.